I don't need to agree with it, or I don't even need to be comfortable in it. I think quite the contrary. You just have to have confidence to do something.
For decades, John Travolta has been one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures. Behind the dazzling smile and the iconic dance moves from Saturday Night Fever and Grease lies a man who has faced unimaginable tragedy, persistent rumors, and questions that have followed him for nearly 50 years. Now at 71, Travolta's recent choices and rare moments of openness are painting a picture many have long suspected. From his relationship with the Church of Scientology to the heartbreaking losses that changed everything, his life tells a story far more complex than what appears on screen. What has really been happening behind the scenes? The whispers began growing louder after a high-profile Scientology gala in 2023. Tom Cruise arrived in his signature dramatic fashion, by helicopter, but the real buzz that night wasn't about who showed up. It was about who didn't. John Travolta, long viewed as one of Scientology's most recognizable ambassadors, was nowhere to be seen. For those familiar with the church's internal dynamics, his absence raised alarms that didn't quickly fade. Travolta's connection to Scientology dates back to his early 20s, when he joined at just 21, long before his career took off. For decades, he credited the church with giving him confidence and helping him land early, career-defining roles. Alongside his late wife, Kelly Preston, he was considered one of Scientology's most influential celebrity figures, second only to Tom Cruise. Their loyalty was rarely questioned. That perception began to shift after Preston's death from breast cancer in 2020. When Travolta announced her passing, long-time observers noticed something striking. Not what he said, but what he didn't. He thanked doctors, nurses, and medical teams at major cancer centers, along with those who supported his family. There was no mention of Scientology, none of the acknowledgments that had once been routine in his public statements. Given the church's complicated history with medical treatment, the omission felt significant. From there, more subtle signs emerged. Insiders shared that Travolta seemed to be redefining his social life. In early 2025, he was spotted partying in Miami with director Randall Emmett, a figure surrounded by substance-related controversies. No one believed Travolta himself was involved in anything inappropriate, but publicly associating with someone carrying that reputation signaled a shift for a man long tied to an organization with strict anti-substance principles. It suggested he was no longer shaping every personal decision around what Scientology might approve. His absence from the 2023 gala only deepened the speculation. As a licensed pilot, Travolta could have flown himself there effortlessly, yet he chose not to attend. A friend told the National Enquirer that his involvement in the church had significantly waned following the deaths of both Kelly Preston and close friend Kirstie Alley, another devout Scientologist who died of cancer in 2022. The source added that, despite their devotion, Scientology hadn't saved them, and that reality weighed heavily on Travolta. The more closely the timeline is examined, the clearer it becomes that this shift wasn't sudden. It was shaped by grief, changing priorities, and the quiet recalibration of a man deciding what his life should look like moving forward. To fully understand this transformation, it's impossible to ignore the tragedy that altered everything: the loss of his son, Jet. On January 2, 2009, the Travolta family were spending the holidays in the Bahamas, enjoying what had become a routine, private getaway. 16-year-old Jet, who had a long history of seizures, went into the bathroom that morning and suffered a severe episode. He collapsed, hit his head, and was found unconscious. Chaos followed. A caretaker attempted to revive him while John and Kelly rushed to help. Paramedics arrived quickly, but nothing could be done. By the time they reached the hospital, Jet was gone. Unlike most grieving parents, the Travoltas were denied privacy. John's fame turned their personal devastation into a public spectacle almost instantly. Reporters swarmed, rumors spread, and unsympathetic commentary flooded the internet within hours. During the extortion trial that followed, Travolta revealed something he had never publicly shared before. Jet lived with autism and a seizure disorder. The family had previously linked his condition to Kawasaki disease, not to deceive the public, but to protect their son. Jet's seizures were frequent and exhausting, often leaving him sleeping for hours afterward. Doctors guided his treatment decisions, including the use and later discontinuation of medication. Despite public speculation tying his medical issues to Scientology's teachings, the reality was more nuanced. The family relied on traditional doctors and followed medical advice, but nuance rarely survives in the face of grief, fame, and public scrutiny. The pain of losing Jet left a visible mark on John Travolta. Friends later said he was completely shattered, and Travolta himself admitted that he questioned how he was supposed to move forward at all. Scientology supporters stayed close to the family during that period, offering structure and their version of emotional support, but nothing could ease the daily reality of waking up without his son. The tragedy didn't just affect him emotionally, it altered the rhythm of his life. It changed the atmosphere in their home, reshaped how he thought about parenting his other children, and influenced how he approached his work. Those who knew him noticed the shift immediately. He grew quieter, his public appearances slowed, and behind the polished interviews and red carpets was a man still trying to understand what life looked like after the worst loss imaginable. What made Jet's story even more devastating were the layers surrounding it. The medical complexities, relentless public scrutiny, legal fallout, and the pressure placed on the family from both the outside world and the church. Every aspect left scars, and those scars shaped everything that followed. And tragically, this was not the only loss that would force Travolta to question the foundations of his life. Another heartbreak was coming, one that pushed him further into unfamiliar territory and raised questions he never expected to face. Kelly Preston passed away on July 12, 2020, at just 57 years old, after a 2-year private battle with breast cancer. When the news became public, it stunned the world, not only because of her age, but because she and Travolta had long appeared to be one of Hollywood's rare, genuinely grounded couples. Their story began in 1987 on the set of The Experts. The film itself faded quickly, but their connection didn't. At the time, Kelly was already well known, and John was navigating a transitional phase in his career. Friends said they quickly fell into an easy rhythm, sharing humor, family values, and a desire to build a stable home away from Hollywood's chaos. They married in 1991, holding 2 ceremonies, one in Paris and another in Florida to ensure legal recognition in the United States. Over the next 3 decades, they raised 3 children, Jet, Ella Blue, and later Benjamin. Through career highs and personal lows, they presented a united front, supporting one another and appearing genuinely content in public. That's why the silence surrounding Scientology in John's announcement of Kelly's death spoke volumes to longtime observers. He thanked the medical teams at MD Anderson Cancer Center and emphasized his gratitude for their care, but made no mention of Scientology. Given how closely the couple had been tied to the church for years, the omission felt deliberate and raised new questions. Former members of Scientology began revisiting a long-circulated belief that Kelly may have been the emotional center of John's involvement. According to them, she had been more deeply committed to the church's programs and lifestyle, and with her gone, John's connection may have naturally loosened. Whether entirely accurate or not, people around him noticed changes. By 2024, sources said Scientology no longer appeared to be the central force in his life. He seemed more introspective, more guarded, and far more careful about opening himself up again. Around that time, quiet rumors surfaced about a possible interest in his cash-out co-star, Kristen Davis. Some insiders claimed his children supported the idea of him finding companionship again, while others insisted he wasn't ready. The word vulnerable came up repeatedly, and for good reason. Travolta wasn't just mourning a spouse, he was grieving the only person who had shared the full weight of his public life, family tragedies, and private struggles. Kelly had been the one who helped him navigate decades of rumors, especially those surrounding his sexuality, stories that Scientology had often worked behind the scenes to manage or suppress in order to protect both Travolta and the church's public image. The extortion attempt following Jet's death further exposed how little control Travolta had over the most personal aspects of his life. It showed how quickly private information could be twisted into leverage by people with harmful intentions. Combined with years of rumors and non-stop scrutiny, Kelly had often been the person who helped him weather storms the public never fully understood. She wasn't just his partner in life, she was his anchor in Hollywood, tragedy, faith, and survival under constant observation. Losing her didn't just change his home life, It dismantled the entire support structure around him. Those close to Travolta say it quietly forced him to rethink where he stood, with Scientology, with Hollywood, and with the version of himself he had maintained for decades. He never said it out loud, but the change was visible in the choices he made afterward, in what he stopped mentioning, and in how his priorities shifted almost immediately. Kelly's death wasn't just another heartbreak. It marked a turning point, one that set the stage for even bigger changes in John Travolta's life, long before the public fully caught on. And yet, Travolta had to navigate something even more surreal: strangers attempting to profit from one of the most devastating moments of his life. The accused included a paramedic and a former Bahamas senator, both charged with trying to pressure him into paying $25 million in exchange for keeping sensitive medical documents private. What made the situation even more painful was that the paramedic was initially portrayed as someone who had tried to help. Over time, the story darkened, revealing how quickly compassion could turn into exploitation in the wrong hands. The trial exposed an uncomfortable truth: Travolta wasn't just grieving, he was also defending his son's dignity and his family's right to privacy. According to former Scientologists who later spoke publicly, that sense of vulnerability may not have been limited to outside threats. Some suggested the church held psychological influence over him simply because of its access to years of deeply personal auditing sessions. Whether or not anything was ever used against him, the idea added another layer to a life already shaped by intense scrutiny. It also helps explain why Travolta has always been fiercely guarded about his private life. Over the years, accusations and lawsuits surfaced from people claiming they had relationships with him. These stories were denied, challenged legally, or faded away quietly. Speculation followed him for decades, resurfacing whenever he took on a new role or paparazzi captured an unflattering moment. Still, Travolta never fed the rumor mill or allowed himself to be drawn into public debates about his identity. His marriage to Kelly Preston helped anchor that privacy. Those close to the couple described a partnership built on shared goals, emotional work, and mutual support behind the scenes. Together, they raised 3 children, leaned on counseling when necessary, and presented a united front despite the constant pressure around them. For Travolta, Kelly wasn't just his wife. She was the steady presence who helped him navigate moments when fame felt more like a burden than a blessing. After her death, the change in him was noticeable, even without explanation. His social media grew quieter and more intimate, centered on his children, small joys, and the routines that replaced the busier chapters of his life. Friends hinted that his home life shifted significantly. A house once filled with large celebrations became calmer and more contained. Travolta spent more time flying his planes, taking short trips to decompress, and creating a rhythm that allowed him and his youngest son, Benjamin, to adjust to their new reality. Professionally, he didn't disappear, but his pace slowed. He continued working, choosing projects that didn't demand the intensity he once thrived on. Films like Cash Out in 2024 and a handful of smaller thrillers kept him engaged without overwhelming him. Those sets were described as relaxed, giving him space to put family first and work second. He also embraced nostalgia more openly than before. His Grease sing-along appearance in June 2024, complete with the Danny Zuko hair and outfit, was more than a fun pop culture moment. It signaled comfort in revisiting the roles that first introduced him to the world. Reconnecting with that earlier version of himself seemed to offer a sense of grounding and familiarity. At home, life became even more rooted. Travolta reportedly returned to cooking, spent time skiing with Benjamin, watched Ella record music, and prioritized close friendships outside the industry. His Ocala home transformed into a true refuge, and the private runway on the property became less a symbol of luxury and more a practical way to escape quietly with his children. Work still remained part of his life. Travolta attended conventions, met fans, and signed autographs, not at massive premieres, but at smaller gatherings where genuine connections were possible. Many noticed that he seemed more approachable than he had been in years. The tension that once hovered around him appeared to soften. Loss has a way of doing that, stripping away what doesn't matter and leaving a person clinging to what feels real, simple, and safe. There was also talk of a memoir. Industry insiders said Travolta had begun collecting stories and reflecting on major turning points in his life, though he hadn't decided whether to publish anything. The hesitation made sense. A memoir would require addressing subjects he had avoided for decades: rumors, tragedy, Scientology, and the evolving sense of self that followed. Some believe he may eventually share his version of the story, while others think he will keep much of it private forever. Hovering over everything was the question of Scientology. Travolta never publicly criticized the church, nor did he confirm stepping away. But the silence, the absences, and the way he rebuilt his life after losing Jet and Kelly spoke louder than any formal statement. His world began revolving around different priorities: his children, quiet work, emotional healing, and the balance he seemed to have spent years searching for. So where does all of this leave John Travolta now? At 71, he appears to be living with more intention and independence than ever before. He hasn't made a dramatic declaration about leaving Scientology, and he likely never will. That has never been his style. While high-profile departures often come with headlines and statements, Travolta has always moved quietly. Even at the height of his involvement, his spiritual life existed separately from his public image. And if you look closely at the choices he's made in recent years, a steady shift becomes clear, one shaped by gradual decisions that, taken together, show a man redistributing his emotional weight toward peace, family, and personal clarity. He still works in Hollywood, but the energy behind his projects feels different. In films like Cash Out, he wasn't chasing a comeback or trying to reinvent himself. He was simply doing work he enjoyed. At this stage, Travolta isn't trying to prove anything. He's no longer the young actor fighting for validation or the comeback star riding momentum. He's a man choosing roles that fit a life built around stability, intention, and hard-earned peace. He still embraces the nostalgia surrounding his most iconic roles, but in a healthier, more grounded way. When he appeared at the Grease sing-along at the Hollywood Bowl in June 2024, it didn't feel like an attempt to relive the past or cling to it. Instead, it came across as a gesture of appreciation, a quiet acknowledgement that he can celebrate where he came from without being trapped there. His brief return to the Danny Zuko look spoke volumes about where he is emotionally. He can laugh at the old days, enjoy the memories, and then return to the quiet life he has built. The overwhelmingly warm response from the audience that night reinforced that he still holds a place in fans' hearts without needing to perform at the pace he once did. Career moments, however, are no longer the center of his world. His priorities are clearly his children. Ella Blue and Benjamin now shape most of his decisions. Ella has confidently stepped into her own creative path, releasing her first EP, Colors of Love, in November 2024. The project felt deeply personal, especially the song Little Bird, which honored her mother. Travolta supported her every step of the way, not as an overbearing Hollywood parent, but as someone genuinely thrilled to see her find her voice. He promotes her music, celebrates her milestones, and allows her to shine without inserting himself into the spotlight. When she performs live, he often stands quietly off to the side, letting her take ownership of the stage, a gesture that speaks louder than any public statement. Benjamin, meanwhile, is growing up in a very different environment than his older siblings did. Today, the Travolta family is smaller, closer, and more inward-focused. Travolta shares glimpses of everyday life, skiing, cooking, traveling, and each moment reflects a father who truly cherishes watching his son grow. After losing both Jet and Kelly, these ordinary moments carry a weight they never did before. Travolta has spoken about the conversations he shares with Benjamin about aging, grief, and love, revealing a softness and patience that weren't always visible in his earlier years. Friends say he's more rooted in family traditions now, more intentional about routines, and deeply committed to creating a steady, secure world for Benjamin as he enters his teenage years. When all of these pieces come together, the truth people sensed for so long becomes clearer. It isn't a shocking secret or a dramatic confession. It's a gradual realization that Travolta's relationship with Scientology, fame, and the demands of his past has evolved. The deaths of Jet and Kelly shook the foundation of his life in ways few fully understood. It's not surprising that his connection to the church may have shifted after losing the two people who meant the most to him. The absence of Scientology from certain pivotal moments, especially during crises, has been widely noticed, yet Travolta has handled it as he handles most things, privately. His choices over the past several years suggest someone redefining what his future should look like. His absence from major Scientology events, his willingness to socialize beyond the church's inner circle, and the growing silence around the church during the hardest chapters of his life all point to a subtle shift. It isn't rejection, it's reorientation. Travolta isn't erasing his past, he's choosing which parts of it to carry forward. Leaving a belief system after nearly 50 years would be incredibly complex, emotionally and socially. Former Scientologists have often described how difficult that process can be. But distance doesn't always mean departure. Sometimes it appears in behavior, in the relationships someone prioritizes, the events they skip, and the subjects they quietly stop addressing. Travolta's recent choices suggest a man creating space to breathe, to parent freely, to grieve in his own way, and to shape a life aligned with who he is now. At 71, he appears more comfortable in himself than ever before. He no longer chases narratives, reacts to rumors, or feels compelled to correct speculation. He allows curiosity to exist without feeding it, a significant shift for someone who spent decades under scrutiny from tabloids, Hollywood, and powerful institutions. That quiet independence seems to have brought him a kind of peace he hadn't fully known before. That peace is reflected in his work as well. He chooses projects because they interest him, not because they serve a carefully crafted image. He engages with fans when it feels meaningful, especially through nostalgia or in support of his children, and steps back when he needs to. His life is no longer built around celebrity, but around connection, his family, the memories of those he has lost, and the future he wants for his children. Now, every choice he makes hints at where he may be headed next. A slow release from the constraints of his old world. A deliberate focus on his children. An openness to new people and experiences. A gentle detachment from the pressure to maintain a particular image. These aren't loud or dramatic changes, they're quiet ones, unfolding through private decisions. And that is why people are watching so closely. Because the smallest shifts now may lead to something far more unexpected in the chapters still to come.